Hi Crystal, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Well, thanks for coming in today. I do want to tell you that everything said here is confidential. There are a few exceptions where I am legally obligated to report different things without your permission, and we'll run down those really quick. If there's risk of imminent danger to yourself or another person, I will have to report that. If there's suspicion of child abuse or abuse of a vulnerable adult, I'm legally obligated to report that. If there's a court order, I have to turn over any notes and any conversation we've had. And I have a duty to warn a third party if there's potential harm threatened to them. And if there is a property damage in a threatening manner, I will have to report that as well. Do you have
Okay.
any questions?
No.
Great. Tell me what brings you here today.
I am wanting to get family counseling for myself as well as my two children. I have a daughter who's 11. Her name is Olivia, and my son Logan, who is 13.
What kind of counseling would you like?
Well, just all of us to get together, maybe some one-on-one with the children, and then maybe one-on-one with me, and then do a family meeting where the three of us would be together to kind of discuss things that might have been said or not said during the one-on-one, to kind of talk as a family. I moved to Lincoln about 6 years ago, well, maybe 7, almost 7 years ago, from Hastings. And I was previously married to their dad, and we were in a kind of an abusive relationship, and the kids were young. Olivia was 4 and Logan was 6 when I did leave. But I'm just starting to notice some things that they're going through. Olivia is starting middle school this year, and she had some run-in with some people and where they were harming her, and she was very easy to forgive. So I just worry that watching me in an abusive relationship with a male, forgiving and allowing it to happen, that she might be picking up some of those things. And then Logan becoming a teenager, of course, he is naughty anyway, just because he's 13. But he is also starting to become more aggressive. And I know a lot of that is just teenagers and hormones. But he's quick to anger, and so I do worry about both of them and how they're dealing with things as they get older that maybe I wasn't aware of because this happened when they were so young.
Okay. And is Olivia in a safe place now in school? There's no harm coming to her?
Correct. The school was aware what was happening. She was with a young boy who was name calling her and then physically touching her. The principal's been notified, the school counselor was notified. They are putting safety plans, and they made the other students sign a contract saying that he won't touch her anymore. I think he's new to the country, and so they felt like maybe there were some barriers there that he didn't understand. And so they've made it quite clear to him that that's not how you treat other people. And they were very proud of Olivia for seeking help instead of, harming him back or just internalizing it. So they are watching her and making sure that she's safe, and they do have them separated. So she's okay. It was basically a one-day deal for her.
So what is your ex-husband's name?
His name is Scott.
Scott. Tell me about your marriage with him and with the children, their interactions.
We were married when I was 20 years old, which is kind of young, and we were together probably about a year and a half before that. And then we were married for 4 years before I had children. He has 3 other children from previous relationships. He has 2 boys from one marriage, and then he has a daughter from a very short relationship, like a month. So he did come with 3 kids, and they were young at the time. His daughter was only 3 months old when I had met him. At first he seemed okay, a little jealous, but nothing too terrible. The first time he ever became physical was because I wouldn't go to bed when he wanted me to go to bed. And so he said it was bedtime, and well, when you're 18 years old and you have your own apartment, I didn't want to go to bed, so I said no. And so he physically dragged me to bed. I grew up in a home that was not really good, And my mother always said, get out of the house. So I would try to leave during these fights, and he would block the door, or he'd throw me down and sit on me so I couldn't leave. None of, he would never slap me or punch me or anything like that, so I just assumed, I had it in my head, well, he's really not abusing you. A little shove wasn't really abuse, or he just wanted to talk, so he wouldn't let me out of the house because he wanted to have the conversation, and it was my fault that I was shutting down and not having the conversation. And of course, over time, this behavior escalated, and I did wait 4 years to have kids because I was kind of worried he wouldn't be a good dad. But then, of course, my internal clock or maternal clock kicked in, and I really wanted children, so I did plan them, even though I probably knew better.
Did your feelings about Scott being a good father change, or your desire to have children?
My desire to have them were stronger than his obvious change. And I would talk to him about having children and my fears, like, you're not really a good person. And he would say, oh, I'll be good to our kids and you can have a baby. And just he reassured me that things would be fine. When I was pregnant, we did have the police called on us like 3 times because we would do a lot of screaming and swearing, and it would be a disturbing of the peace. But when they would come and they would see, I was very pregnant, and they kind of just said, they stood outside the door once and they just said, you both need to tone it down. I mean, nobody was hitting anybody, it was all verbal. And then the last time he hit me quite frequently between the years of being married and being pregnant. And then the last time he hit me, I was 8 months pregnant, and he wouldn't let me out of a doorway, he just kept shoving me. And I did threaten him, if you ever lay a hand on me, I did say I would take your child and leave. So from that moment until 6 years, he never laid a hand on me, ever. And then it started when Logan was about 6 years old again, and that's pretty much when I started to end the relationship. We had a lot of verbal, but no longer physical, like bad physical.
So when you say it started again, tell me what started exactly.
It all depends on your definition of abuse. There were some times where, once Logan got sick, he vomited and Scott was cleaning it up, and he was very angry that he had to clean up. Scott would always get very angry, very loud, and he would just yell. He didn't have breaks and he had no patience. And so when I yelled back, I'm like, you need to calm down, he's sick, he can't help this. He took the puke rag and slapped me in the face with it. So things like that would happen, but he would never physically touch me.
Did you see that act as an act of abuse?
No, I just seen it as an act of he was not nice.
Explain to me your definition of abuse.
Probably if they doubled up their fist and punched you right in the face.
Okay.
Scott would do things like pull my hair, pin me down and spit on me, wrap his arms around me so I couldn't move. Once he punched me in the leg, and I took that as a sign of abuse because he punched me. Slapped me across the face if I talked wrong. But he would pin me down a lot and stick his fingers between my ribs and push as hard as he could, or just not let me go. And at no time did I think that he was abusing me. I just thought he was being mean, not a nice guy at the time.
Okay.
So, for lack of better words, I just thought he was having an asshole moment.
Understandable.
But then, when Logan was about 6, it just escalated. He started to choke me more when he would get mad, push me down, wouldn't let me go to bed. He'd sit on the edge of the bed and hit me because I would just roll over. My first reaction is to roll over and say nothing. Absolutely do not talk back. I was always taught they can't fight with a wall. It takes 2 to argue. He would start fights late at night, so I would be laying in bed and I would just roll over and he wouldn't let me go to sleep. Things like that.
You say you were taught how to prevent, or not prevent, but to deal with this abusive behavior. Who taught you that?
I grew up in a very abusive home. I was born into an abusive family. My mom and my dad, well, not my mother, my dad, would hurt my mother quite often. So, I mean, I was literally born into that. And when we were younger, there was 4 children in my family. My parents had 4 kids. We had one set of bunk beds for us 4 children. And I was probably only like 2 or 3. And I can remember laying in bed with my siblings, and we would switch. You know, maybe one night I'd have to sleep with my brother, or another night a sister, but it was always 2 to a bed. And I can remember holding them at night and all of us crying and waiting for the slapping or the punching to stop and hearing my dad leave. And then when he would leave, we would run out to our mom, and my big sister would always get a washcloth and we'd clean her up, and then we'd go lay in bed with her. And she would sob, and all of us would keep, you know, saying, "You're okay, Mommy," and "We love you, Mommy," and things like that. So that was very young. And that escalated. He almost killed her one night. She did try to call the police a few times, but this was back in the early 80s. And they would say she had the right to leave, but she didn't have the right to take us. So they didn't offer her any help, and they didn't arrest my dad. My dad would say, well, it was self-defense, even though my mother was beaten up and he wasn't. So the police would just leave. And then finally one night he did almost kill her, and we ended up going to a homeless shelter to stay. They had a battered wife shelter that took people in. So we stayed there for a while, and then when you stay too long, they have to move you to a different shelter. So we got moved to another shelter. And then they just asked her, where would you like to go, if you could do anything and be anyone. So she told them she wanted to move. We lived in Michigan at the time, and she wanted to move to Oregon. So they gave her 5 train tickets, one way. And we went to Oregon, and we did stay in another shelter there so she could get a job. And then, and these were battered wife shelters. These weren't homeless shelters. It was just for battered women and children. We stayed at another place until she got a job as a CNA and made enough money for us to get our own place. Then, because she was working and had 4 little kids, she did meet my stepdad at a bar, and he happened to be an alcoholic who did not work. And the deal was, I'll give you a place to stay as long as you babysit my 4 children. So she brought him home, and he lived with us. And they were together years, probably about the time I was 4 until I was 14, so 10 years.
Was there abuse in that relationship between the 2 of them?
He was mainly verbally abusive because he was an alcoholic. He drank a lot. He drank all day, every day. So by mid-afternoon, he would become extremely verbally abusive, which I'm sure would go to the emotional end of it. But as far as physical, I would say probably maybe 10 times throughout my whole life I've seen him become physical with her. And at this point, sometimes she would retaliate, so they would both be in a physical altercation.
What about with you and your siblings in both relationships? Did you feel the brunt of physical, emotional, verbal abuse?
With my actual dad, I didn't. I know he abused my older sister because she would try to get in the middle of it, and he would just pick her up by her hair and throw her. My stepdad, I would definitely say the verbal, because he would attack anyone in the room. And then he would yell for hours like the man never shut up. We'd all go to bed and he'd still be screaming and swearing at nobody. So I would say more, but he never physically touched me, ever.
What did your mom tell you about this abuse? Did she condone it? Did she excuse it? Did she defend it?
It was pretty much, I remember being told quite often, this is all I've got. I have nothing more to give. This is our lives. You don't cry about it, you don't dwell upon it, you don't get upset about it. It is what it is. It was very, this is it, this is all I've got. And so it was very normal, very normal. Like I didn't even know there was something wrong with it until probably a teenager, when my teenage friends couldn't come over. Their parents wouldn't let them because they could hear all the screaming. And so for me it was perfectly normal, and I was always basically just told, we're fine. But she did say things, like if you're ever fighting, leave the house or don't speak, because if you fight back, you're only egging it on.
So the advice your mother gave you seems to be how to protect yourself in an abusive relationship, not how to avoid
Right.
or a healthy relationship. Tell me about what you teach your own daughter about relationships.
Well, I felt when I was growing up that the attitude was whatever happens today does not carry over to tomorrow. So if anybody got screamed or sweared at, name called, or hit, that was today. And I kind of did that in my own marriage. That was today, it's not tomorrow, and tomorrow's a new day. So even in my own marriage, it was very normal. I was not that upset by it. I mean, yes, it upset me. No, I didn't like it. Yes, I know it was wrong. But that was today, and tomorrow is a totally different day. I did end up leaving my husband because I had to protect my children, and I knew that, and I didn't want them to live the life I lived.
What did you need to protect them from?
From my complacency with the situation and the fact that their dad was so verbally and physically and emotionally and mentally abusive to them. I knew that growing up like this was harmful.
So your ex-husband abused your children as well as you?
He did my son a couple times. My son, they were playing video games where my husband was playing video games, and my son made my daughter cry because he was, 4 years old and she was 2, so it's not a hard effort. And he got very angry because Logan made Olivia cry, which interrupted his game, and he got up and he punched Logan in the face, which gave him a black eye, and Logan fell down to the ground and received a rug burn on the other side of his face. So he did do that to Logan. With Olivia, because she was younger, it was more, he would throw things at her, and then when she would cry, he'd go, "Oh, I was just kidding." Everything was just kidding. He'd get mad at them and poke them in the ribs or squeeze their kneecaps, like above the knee, and when they would cry, it was, "I'm just kidding." So when I was leaving him, I did make him leave the house, and the physicalness actually escalated. I locked the door once on him, and he broke into our home, kicking the door down. He would come over and fight with me and then hit me in front of the kids. And this was after I did have him kicked out. He did move in with his dad. He demanded to see his kids or he'd kidnap them from me. And I did go, we had a very bad night after he had abused me, and I never told anyone because I was educated and I knew this was wrong, so I just felt I would look stupid. So I did go down to, it's called SASA, which is a women's group in Hastings where I lived, and I told them what happened, and I told them I needed help, I needed out. They said because I was a nurse and I made too much money, they financially could not help me at all, even though I had no money. The home was in my name as well as his. So they said I could leave the home, but then I knew he would never pay the bills, because that's the kind of man he was. So I didn't
To
think.
stop you for just a second, I want you to tell me in that moment when they said you make too much money, we can't help you. Explain to me how you felt, how that made you feel.
I felt humiliated and alone because it took so much courage to finally seek help. I mean, this had been going on for 12 years plus, and I'd never told anyone. It was embarrassing. And I was educated and strong, and yes, we did own a home and a car, but we had a double mortgage, we had credit card debt, and so when I needed assistance to maybe just go get an apartment, they couldn't do it. And then I just felt embarrassed, like, well then why am I even here? Because no one can help me. And so then I asked if I could file a restraining order, and they did not recommend it. They felt that it would escalate Scott and he might really possibly even kill me at this point, based off of the events that had been happening the weeks before. So I did file the restraining order, and he did stay away for a little while. And then, of course, I felt guilty. I took his children from him.
What made you, first I want to commend you for taking that step to leave to better your children's life. That was, I'm sure, extremely difficult. But you have trained professionals telling you not to or suggesting that you not file a restraining order. What made you choose to do it anyway against their advice?
Because I thought the restraining order would scare him. No one had ever stood up to him. I believe that he targeted me and the children because we were weaker, but I'd never seen him come up against another man or, up against the law. He didn't drink, he didn't do drugs. So I didn't think he would be capable of like severe erratic behavior. So I thought the restraining order would scare him and make him calm down.
Are there questions, or tell me some questions that you think that people working in women's shelters can ask a domestic abuse survivor to help them decide whether in a situation like yours it would be safe to do that? Or because it's never black and white. You obviously are very self-aware. You knew your husband, so you knew that was the right decision. Are there any questions or anything that you think the professionals can ask to better help other survivors that may not be as strong and as aware as you are?
I think they just need to remember that it is humiliation that a woman is experiencing, because everyone knows that abuse is wrong. And to recognize that humiliation, just be empathetic to it. And then I think they do need to ask, what does your husband do when he's angry? And are you fearful? And regardless of income, well, then put the girl up in a hotel for the night, or ask her, would that help if we got you away for 1 or 2 nights until things calm down? Because just because you make money doesn't mean you have money.
Absolutely.
And I know there's incomes and I know there's limited resources, but just something, offer them something, because it does take a lot of guts to come in. And then when you feel, okay, I finally did this, I finally came, and I still have nothing. I'm at the square I started at.
You didn't feel validated in here?
I just didn't feel helped, and I was always, the people who did know about the abuse, it was, well, you need to go get help, and they have women's shelters for people like you, and no one did help me, and there was no women's shelters for me. And so that puts, if I wasn't who I was, I think another woman, that would have put her right back at home with her abuser, because if we're not offered help and there's nowhere for us to go, we just go home.
What made you said if I wasn't who I was. Tell me about who you are and what made you overcome that.
I think growing up in that environment and honestly being told this is it. I wasn't a victim. I don't like to look at myself as a victim. I think it has made me stronger, even with what I dealt with in my own marriage. It made me probably prolong the divorce and stay longer than I honestly should have, or even married him for that fact. But it made me go, you know what, that was today, and I have to figure out tomorrow. And there's no point in crying about today. So I knew I had to do something to stop him tomorrow. And I thought, no, I better file that restraining order, or tomorrow he's coming back. But as long as I can file this and have the police scare him, because I know men who usually abuse are wimps, and he was a wimp, and that did scare him. And I only needed him scared for a few days, just to make him calm down and stop, because he was escalating, and I wanted it to back down to a normal level. So my son, though, he did go to the school. He was in kindergarten at the time. And all of this was happening all at once, him busting down the door. I had already kicked him out. He was living with his parents at the time. And I think Logan and Olivia had only gone there maybe 1 or 2 times for a day visit with his parents present. Like, I didn't leave him alone. I didn't leave him alone not because I feared he'd hurt my kids. He did harm Logan that one time, but that was the one time. Other times it wasn't like that. It was more verbal, or maybe just messing with them. I guess that's abuse if you pinch their legs, but he wouldn't leave a mark or anything, and it wasn't done out of anger. He just liked to hurt people. So Logan did go to a school counselor, and he said, I want to tell you something, but I'm afraid, because Scott had made him understand, if you tell anyone, I'll go to jail, and it'll be your fault that Daddy's in jail. But Logan did want to tell. And the school counselor, she told him, you know, because he said, you can't tell anyone. And she said, I promise I will not tell anyone what you have to say. And Logan did tell her. And when she heard the things going on, she said, I have to call the police. My son lost it. He started screaming and crying. They did call the police. I was working late and was having a friend pick up the kids, or pick up Logan. Libby wasn't in school, from school, and they would not release Logan to her. And she called me and said, you have to get here. The police are here with your son and they're not letting him go. And I was en route anyway. I wasn't that late from work. So I did get to the school. The officer was very mean to me. He was very abrupt. And he basically accused me of knowing everything going on. He said that, you know, Logan had been telling him that Scott would get angry out at Grandpa's house and push him or squeeze his arm hard or something like that. And he said because I knew of it, he could take away my children for providing an unsafe environment.
So the police officer threatened you?
Yes. And
without
that's,
hearing your side of the story?
yes, because then I instantly started crying and I said, I am doing something about it. I did kick him out. I didn't think he was doing this in front of his parents. I mean, he'd never behaved that way in front of other people. I said, I didn't think it was happening. I would have never sent them there, and they didn't tell me. You know, and I don't think they told me because, well, it was pretty normal. It wasn't abnormal. And I didn't know he was wanting to tell somebody, and that's why he chose to tell the counselor. They did let Logan come home with me. They did go stop and visit with Scott and basically told him, knock it off or else. And instantly Scott drove to our home. He barged into the door. He was screaming at the top of his lungs, where is he, where is he? And he seen Logan and started chasing him. And Logan was screaming, leave me alone. And I was trying to get in the middle, and Scott was screaming, you're the worst son ever. You almost made me go to jail today. What's the matter with you? That really all bothered Logan. So we fast forward to Logan being 13.
I'm going to stop. Before we fast forward, I want to back up a little bit
Okay.
to the moment in school with the police officers threatening to take your children away. What made them just change their mind and allow you to take your children home? In your perspective, what changed
I think
that?
because I started crying, you know, I walked in there pretty normal. And again, this was our normal life.
Explain to me your normal.
Our normal was Scott screaming. And it was him poking, or, you know, the abuse was very normal. It wasn't really upsetting. And, you know, to hear about it, I wasn't shocked. It wasn't that I didn't listen to Logan or validate Logan. It just wasn't shocking. It wasn't like if somebody was to harm my kids today, I would lose it. I would scream and cry, I'd call the police, whatever. But this was our everyday. And so there was nothing to get upset about. This always happened. When the officer threatened to take my children, of course I became very scared and I started to cry, and instantly he became very empathetic. And I think at first he thought I didn't care. I come across as maybe I don't care. We did have Logan in a counselor in 3rd grade, just very shortly. He was having some issues at school. They felt he was bullying. I did not. He never harmed anyone. He was like air punching, things like that. I did take him to a counselor, and she was very, I guess straightforward with Logan and I. She would ask very direct questions. There was none of this, let's let the child come to you and talk. She knew that I needed somebody to get to know him and get to know him quickly. So she just dove right into the ugliness, which is what Logan needed. He didn't need, because he was never going to tell again. Logan was very afraid of counselors and still is. But this counselor, you know, after several visits, she did have like an exit visit with us both in the room. She was very honest, very blunt, and which I enjoyed about her. And the fact that she didn't poo-poo getting to know my kid and keep taking my money. It was, what's the problem? Let's get right to it, because that's why you're here. And she said, you know, there's nothing wrong with Logan. He's very well adjusted. And she said, the problem is people who meet you, you do not fit the profile of a battered wife or battered children. She said, you wouldn't know unless you guys told somebody.
Tell me your version of the profile of a battered woman and children.
My mother being a battered woman, for years, well, I shouldn't say my mother, that's not nice. I think the profile of a battered woman is she is weak. She's put in a horrible situation that she's almost not aware of. She's not educated. She's mild. She has nowhere to go. That's why she puts up with this, because where else is there? I don't think she has close family or friends that she could talk to or that would help her. And she always thinks it's all her fault. She did something wrong. In my situation, I never believed I did anything wrong. My situation was I did believe I was never good enough. That maybe if I worked harder or became more educated or cleaned better, then maybe you'd like me and quit hitting me. That was my thought process. But I was more angry instead of, I would say, crying about it.
Do you feel that people treat you differently? For instance, the police officer at Logan School would have treated you differently if you fit the profile you just described?
Yes. If I would have walked in there, tears in my eyes, shaken, visibly upset, and then explained immediately that I was a battered wife and I need help, I think they would have been a lot nicer a lot sooner.
Explain to me why you, especially in that situation, why you didn't put forth that information.
Because I felt very humiliated that I had allowed this to happen to me, and I felt like a bad mother for allowing my children to be a witness and then becoming a part in it. That is my fault. So that's where I say this was my fault, and I'm ashamed. It's like I've done, excuse me, something wrong. And well, like most things you do wrong, you don't want to put that out there to people. So you just let it go. You hide it. You act okay, because it has to be okay. Or you become too weak.
Do you feel that the people at the SAS Center would have treated you differently had you presented yourself in your version of a battered woman queen?
No, I think they were very nice to me and they were understanding. Like I said, the only thing that was different than I would say a normal profile of a battered woman is, well, for me, normal, is they're of low education or they're of low economic status. And I was neither. I had money and I had education. I just didn't have enough money. And so they couldn't help me. And that's what I didn't like about them, because, you know, I've been told, you know, my whole life, well, you got to get help, you have to seek help, you can't let a man harm you. And, you know, being a nurse, I would advise a patient to seek help. And then I felt finally I had broken that stigma, which is my own stigma of what a battered woman is. And I finally broke through that on my own, and I still got no help. And so then I just felt like, well, that was pointless. And now 2 more people know, and a police station knows. So it just brought, for me, more humiliation. And I didn't like that. So.
Very good. It's took so much courage for you to tell the people that you did and to seek help and to rise above even when the help that you thought was going to be there wasn't, and to continue with that. So I commend you for that.